Captain Iris Delacroix heard the whispered comment as she walked past the senior officers at the Pentagon briefing. She probably doesn't even know what real combat looks like. The words struck her like shrapnel, but what cut deeper was knowing she possessed documents that would expose 2 decades of betrayal within the highest levels of military command. The quiet 29-year-old intelligence analyst had spent 3 years gathering evidence that would destroy careers, end friendships, and reveal how her father's death in Iraq had been covered up by the very people now questioning her credibility. Captain Iris Delacroix adjusted her uniform as she entered the sterile conference room deep within the Pentagon's most secure wing. At 29, she carried herself with the measured precision of someone whose analytical mind had uncovered secrets that powerful people preferred to keep buried. Her assignment to the Defense Intelligence Review Board seemed routine to outside observers, but Iris knew this meeting would either validate 3 years of dangerous investigation or end her military career permanently. The morning light filtered through bulletproof windows, illuminating an assembly of generals, colonels, and defense contractors who controlled billions in military spending. General Morrison commanded the review board, while Admiral Banks oversaw the classified operations assessment. Their comfortable authority filled the room like expensive cologne, masking the rot that Iris had spent years documenting. Her leather briefcase contained evidence that most attendees assumed were standard intelligence reports and operational summaries. The worn edges of the case told stories of late nights in classified archives and dangerous meetings with whistleblowers who risked everything to expose institutional betrayal. Stories about warriors like Iris remind us that courage sometimes means challenging the system. Consider subscribing to hear more about the incredible people who choose truth over comfort. Iris's analytical abilities had been shaped by her father, Colonel Marcus Delacroix, who had taught her to read between the lines of official reports and question information that seemed too convenient or clean. Growing up on military bases around the world, she had learned to recognize the difference between honest mistakes and deliberate deception through careful observation of how different commanders handled difficult situations. Her father had instilled in her an uncompromising respect for truth and accountability, values that had guided his own distinguished career until his death during a classified operation in Iraq. The official reports described his death as the result of accurate intelligence that had simply been overwhelmed by superior enemy forces. But inconsistencies in the timeline had always troubled Iris. Her military service began with top scores in intelligence training at Fort Huachuca, where she specialized in document analysis and pattern recognition. During deployments to Afghanistan and Syria, she had developed techniques for detecting falsified reports and identifying information that had been deliberately altered or suppressed to protect specific interests. What drove Iris wasn't personal revenge or career advancement. Her father had died believing he was serving honorably in a mission based on accurate intelligence and sound strategic planning. The discovery that his death had resulted from deliberate intelligence manipulation and subsequent cover-up had transformed her grief into a methodical pursuit of justice that consumed every aspect of her life. The institutional resistance began immediately when Iris submitted her preliminary findings to the Defense Intelligence Review Board. General Morrison dismissed her analysis as the work of an inexperienced officer who lacked understanding of complex operational realities. His patronizing explanation suggested that junior analysts often mistook routine classification procedures for evidence of impropriety. Admiral Banks reinforced this dismissal by questioning whether someone with limited field experience could properly interpret intelligence materials that required understanding of broader strategic contexts. His tone implied that Iris was seeing conspiracies where more experienced officers recognized normal operational challenges and bureaucratic inefficiencies. Colonel Stevens, who oversaw intelligence analysis for the Joint Chiefs, suggested that Iris's emotional attachment to her father's memory was clouding her professional judgment. He explained that family members often struggled to accept the harsh realities of military operations, leading them to search for explanations that provided comfort rather than truth. The situation escalated when Iris presented specific evidence of falsified intelligence reports that had been used to justify high-risk operations. Several board members interrupted her presentation with questions that seemed designed to discredit her methodology rather than examine her findings. Their coordinated response suggested prior discussion about how to handle her allegations. General Morrison stated firmly that the board's charter limited its authority to reviewing already established intelligence procedures rather than investigating unsubstantiated claims about past operations. He reminded Iris that questioning the integrity of senior officers without overwhelming evidence could constitute insubordination and damage to military cohesion. The most revealing moment came when Admiral Banks suggested that Iris's allegations, even if pursued through proper channels, would serve no constructive purpose and might compromise ongoing operations that depended on institutional trust and confidence. His comment revealed the fundamental tension between accountability and organizational protection that had enabled the cover-up to persist for 2 decades. The board members' unified dismissal made clear that they viewed institutional stability as more important than individual justice, even when that stability was built on lies that had cost American lives. Sitting alone during the recess, Iris opened her father's final letter, written days before his death and mailed to her through military postal channels. His words carried the enthusiasm of someone who believed his mission would make a meaningful difference in protecting American interests and Iraqi civilians. The letter's optimism made the truth of his betrayal even more devastating. The board's dismissive attitudes reminded Iris of her father's stories about institutional loyalty that sometimes conflicted with moral obligations. He had taught her that the military's strength came from honest assessment of failures as well as celebration of successes, but the current leadership seemed determined to protect reputations rather than pursue truth. She thought about the other families who had received folded flags and sanitized explanations for deaths that resulted from intelligence manipulation rather than enemy action. Their grief had been compounded by lies that prevented them from understanding what their loved ones had really died for, denying them even the dignity of accurate closure. The weight of evidence in her briefcase felt heavier than combat gear. Each document represented months of dangerous investigation, careful verification, and personal risk that had already cost her friendships and career advancement opportunities. Some of the sources who had provided critical evidence were still serving in positions where retaliation was possible, but her father's memory demanded more than institutional convenience. His death had meaning only if the truth about intelligence failures was acknowledged and corrected to prevent future betrayals. The afternoon session revealed the full extent of institutional resistance when Iris presented evidence that directly implicated several board members in the intelligence manipulation scheme. General Morrison's comfortable demeanor shifted to barely controlled anger as she documented how falsified threat assessments had been used to justify operations that enriched defense contractors while endangering American personnel. Admiral Banks attempted to discredit Iris's sources, suggesting that disgruntled former intelligence officers often fabricated evidence to support personal grievances against their previous commanders. His detailed knowledge of her investigation methods suggested that her activities had been monitored and her sources potentially identified, raising serious concerns about operational security and whistleblower protection. Colonel Stevens revealed the depth of institutional corruption when he mentioned specific, classified details about Iris's father's final mission that should have been unknown to anyone not directly involved in the cover-up. His casual reference to operational information that had been officially destroyed demonstrated that the conspiracy involved multiple levels of command and had been carefully maintained over 2 decades. The situation became critical when General Morrison announced that Iris's security clearance was being suspended, pending investigation of her unauthorized access to classified materials. The timing of this action, coinciding with her presentation of evidence, suggested coordination between the review board and security personnel to prevent further disclosure. Iris realized that the institutional response wasn't just defensive, it was actively hostile. The same people responsible for her father's death were now positioned to destroy her career and silence the truth permanently. Her evidence was compelling, but institutional power was systematically working to ensure it would never reach decision-makers who might act on it. The board members' increasing aggressiveness revealed that her investigation had identified something far more significant than individual intelligence failures. The cover-up protected a systemic pattern of corruption that continued to endanger American personnel while enriching the very people responsible for oversight and accountability. Without requesting permission, Iris activated the secure recording device she had hidden in her briefcase and began documenting the board's attempts to suppress evidence of intelligence fraud and cover-up. Her actions violated multiple security protocols, but she knew that conventional channels had been compromised by the same people she was trying to expose. She presented audio recordings of Colonel Stevens discussing how intelligence reports had been deliberately falsified to justify profitable military contracts, conversations that revealed the financial motivations behind operations that had killed her father and dozens of other American personnel. The recordings demonstrated that intelligence manipulation wasn't occasional, incompetence but systematic fraud designed to generate revenue for defense contractors. General Morrison demanded that Iris stop the recording immediately, warning that unauthorized documentation of classified proceedings constituted espionage and could result in decades of imprisonment. But Iris continued presenting evidence that showed how Admiral Banks had personally ordered the destruction of intelligence reports that contradicted preferred operational narratives. The most damaging evidence came from her father's final intelligence assessment, which had accurately predicted the operational failures that led to his death. Colonel Stevens had personally suppressed this assessment and ordered the mission to proceed despite clear warnings about intelligence inadequacy and enemy preparation. As Iris methodically destroyed the official narrative that had protected careers and contracts for 20 years, the board members realized they were facing exposure that would trigger congressional investigations, criminal prosecutions, and the end of a corruption network that had operated with impunity since the beginning of the Iraq War. Admiral Banks attempted to have Iris physically restrained by security personnel, but her evidence had already been transmitted to journalists and congressional oversight committees through secure channels that couldn't be intercepted or suppressed. The truth was now beyond institutional control, and the consequences would reshape military intelligence operations permanently. The exposure was swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours, Iris's evidence had triggered congressional hearings, FBI investigations, and a complete review of intelligence operations dating back to the Iraq invasion. General Morrison, Admiral Banks, and Colonel Stevens were suspended, pending criminal investigation of their roles in intelligence, fraud and conspiracy to conceal evidence. The investigation revealed a corruption network that had systematically falsified intelligence assessments to justify military contracts worth billions of dollars, resulting in unnecessary operations that had killed hundreds of American personnel and thousands of civilians. Iris's 3-year investigation had documented the most significant military intelligence scandal in modern American history. Colonel Marcus Delacroix was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Intelligence Cross for his accurate assessment of operational risks that had been suppressed by his superiors. 23 other American personnel who had died in similar operations received formal recognition that their deaths had resulted from institutional failures rather than enemy action. Most importantly, Iris's evidence led to fundamental reforms in intelligence oversight, with mandatory independent review of operational assessments and protection for analysts who reported evidence of manipulation or fraud. The Pentagon established new protocols requiring civilian oversight of military intelligence operations to prevent future corruption. The families who had lost loved ones in operations based on falsified intelligence finally received accurate information about how their family members had died serving their country. Their grief was validated, and their questions were finally answered with truth rather than institutional convenience. When Iris visited her father's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, she placed a copy of his posthumous commendation on his headstone. Colonel Marcus Delacroix's commitment to truth and accountability had been vindicated, and his daughter had honored his memory by ensuring that his sacrifice would prevent future betrayals of American personnel who deserved honest leadership and accurate intelligence.